The automatic doors of the Food Max supermarket opened with a distinctive whir every few seconds, letting a stream of shoppers into the brightly lit hall. Dana Jenkins mechanically scanned the items, looking at the numbers on the cash register screen. 22 years old, 2 years married, and every day the same. 8 hours behind the cash register for $11 an hour. "Do you need a bag?" she asked the next customer, automatically smiling the professional smile required by management. The numbers spun around in her head: $450 for rent, $120 for utilities, $200 for groceries, $80 for Ernest's gas to get to work. Her salary barely covered half of her expenses. Ernest worked as a loader at the AutoHub Auto Parts warehouse on the other side of town. It was hard physical labor for $15 an hour, but in recent months, orders had slowed and working hours had been cut. Instead of a full day, he now worked only 6 hours, sometimes 5. The family budget was stretched to the limit. That evening, Dana stood at the stove in their small one-bedroom apartment on Maple Street, cooking pasta with tomato sauce from a can. Cheap and filling, their staple meal for the past 6 months. Ernest sat on the couch, staring at the TV, a can of beer in his hand, his third of the evening. "Mrs. Garcia asked about the rent again," Dana said, stirring the sauce. "We owe $200 for last month." Ernest didn't take his eyes off the screen. Some reality show with shouting and fighting was on. "We'll find it somehow." "Where, Ernest? We don't have any money. I calculated it. Even if you work full-time, we still won't have enough." "Don't get on my nerves, Dana. It's been a lousy day." Ernest finally turned to her, and she saw the familiar look of irritation on his face. "There have been more layoffs at the warehouse. Johnson was fired. They said they didn't need extra hands." Dana felt her heart sink. Johnson had worked at the warehouse for 5 years, and if they were firing such experienced employees, Ernest could be next. She turned off the stove and walked over to the table, setting down 2 plates of pasta. "Maybe I should look for a second job," she suggested. "An evening shift somewhere." "When would you sleep? You look exhausted as it is." Ernest picked up his fork and began to eat without looking at her. "Just don't make me think about it right now." After dinner, they watched TV in silence. Ernest finished his 4th can of beer, and Dana leafed through an old magazine she had found in the break room at work. At 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Dana looked at Ernest in surprise. They weren't expecting any guests. "Did anyone order food delivery?" asked a voice with a slight accent from behind the door. "We didn't order anything," Dana replied, approaching the door. "Apartment 4B, Jenkins?" Ernest got up from the couch with an irritated sigh. Probably another wrong address. Or maybe the neighbors ordered it. He opened the door. Standing outside was a young man of about 21, wearing a red Uber Eats jacket and carrying a thermal bag. He was dark-skinned, of average height, with a friendly smile and a slightly confused expression. "Sorry, guys. This is an order for Jenkins, apartment 4B, Chinese food for $23. But if you didn't order..." The delivery guy looked at his phone, checking the address. "We didn't order anything," Ernest repeated, but less sharply. "Maybe the 4th floor, apartment B. We have strange numbering here." "I'll check," the guy smiled. "Thanks for your patience. By the way, I'm Javier. I'm new to the area. I don't know all the addresses yet." Dana smiled back involuntarily. "Dana, and this is my husband Ernest." There was something about the guy's open manner that was endearing. "It's really easy to get confused with the apartments here. I couldn't find the mailboxes myself for the first week." "Yeah, I see." Javier looked at the list on his phone. "There's another 4B on the 4th floor. I'll go check. Sorry again for the trouble." After he left, Ernest closed the door and returned to the TV. "Newbie," he muttered. "Probably a desperate student, like all these delivery guys." Dana sat down next to him, but her thoughts were not on the TV show. Javier seemed somehow bright to her, not at all like the sullen, weary people she usually saw in this neighborhood. There was an energy about him, a zest for life that contrasted with their gloomy existence. "He's a cute guy," she said casually. Ernest glanced at her quickly. "If you like brats," he replied, and turned up the volume on the TV. The next few days passed in the usual routine. Dana got up at 7 in the morning, had a quick breakfast of coffee and toast, and took the bus to the supermarket by 9. 8 hours at the checkout, a 30-minute lunch break, then back to the checkout until 6 in the evening. Home by bus, cooking dinner, TV, sleep. Ernest woke up later, around 8, and worked from 10 to 4 if there were enough orders. If not, he would come home for lunch and hang out in front of the TV with a beer. Their conversations became shorter and more formal. "How's work?" "Fine." "What's for dinner?" "Whatever's there." "There's not much money left in the account." "I know." On weekends, they sometimes went to a cheap bar on the next street, where Ernest met up with friends from the warehouse. Dana sat nearby, sipping cheap beer and listening to endless complaints about the bosses, the economy, and life in general. Sometimes Ernest drank more than usual, and then the trip home became a challenge. He could fly off the handle over any little thing, yell at her for answering his friends incorrectly or acting smart. At times like these, Dana realized that their marriage had become a habit, a necessity to share expenses and responsibilities. The passion that had once existed between them had faded under the pressure of everyday problems and financial stress. Ernest became irritable and withdrawn, and she became cautious and silent. A week after her first meeting with the delivery man, Dana saw Javier again. This time he was actually delivering an order to their apartment. Ernest had decided to spend the rest of his weekly salary on pizza, saying he deserved a decent dinner. Dana opened the door and saw a familiar, friendly face. "Oh, hi." Javier smiled when he recognized her. "This is definitely the right address now. Pepperoni pizza, $28. "Yes, that's for us." Dana took the box, feeling their fingers accidentally touch. "Ernest, the pizza's here." "How are you? Settling into the neighborhood?" she asked, taking money out of her wallet. "Slowly. I work mostly here in downtown. There are a lot of students, they order a lot." Javier waited while she counted the bills. "How about you? Do you both work?" "I'm a cashier at a supermarket. He's a loader. Standard for this neighborhood." Dana shrugged but smiled. Ernest appeared behind her and took the pizza box. "How much do I owe you?" he asked curtly, clearly not in the mood for conversation. "28, Javier repeated, taking the money. "Enjoy your dinner." After the door closed, Ernest put the pizza on the table and opened the box. "Chatty," he said, taking a slice. "He'd be better off working faster than talking." Dana didn't respond, but deep down she disagreed. Javier seemed polite and friendly to her, not chatty. In their neighborhood, where most people were sullen from constant problems, such an attitude was rare. 2 weeks after meeting him, Dana noticed that she was ordering food delivery more often. At first, she justified it by saying she was tired after work or wanted to please Ernest, but gradually she realized that she was hoping to see Javier. It didn't work out every time. Different couriers handled the deliveries, but when he called, Dana's heart somehow began to beat faster. "Chinese food again?" Javier smiled, standing at the door of their apartment on another Thursday evening. "You must be big fans of Asian food." "Yes, we love it," Dana lied, although in reality she ordered the first dish she came across just to see him. "How about you? Are you studying somewhere?" "At a community college, part-time. I'm studying auto mechanics." Javier lingered at the door longer than usual. "I want to open my own auto repair shop someday. For now, I'm delivering food to pay for my studies." Ernest was in the shower, and they spoke more quietly than usual. Dana noticed how Javier looked at her, not the way one looks at a married woman, but with genuine interest. "That's a nice dream," she said. "I hope it works out." "What are your dreams?" Javier asked, and Dana realized that he was addressing her informally. Something inside her stirred pleasantly. "I don't know," she replied honestly. I used to want to be a teacher, but life turned out differently. The sound of the shower turning off interrupted their conversation. Javier quickly took the money and said goodbye, but their eyes met for a second longer than necessary. Ernest came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, gloomy and tired. Things were getting worse at work. Orders were dwindling, and his bosses were hinting at possible layoffs after the holidays. Did that delivery guy come again? He asked, noticing the boxes of food. Yes, the same guy, Javier. Ernest opened the refrigerator and took out a can of beer. We've been ordering too often. It's expensive. I know, but I don't have the energy to cook after work. Ernest didn't answer, sat down at the table and started eating. Dana watched him and realized that her husband's irritation was growing not only because of money. Something in his behavior had changed over the last month. He had become more suspicious and quick-tempered. The next day at work, Dana caught herself thinking about Javier. His smile, his interested gaze, his questions about her dreams. All of this was so different from what she got at home. Ernest had long since lost interest in her life beyond everyday matters. That evening, Ernest came home earlier than usual, angry and drunk. It turned out that there had been a big argument with his boss at the warehouse, and Ernest had been reprimanded for insubordination and aggressive behavior. That jerk McCarthy thinks he can boss me around, Ernest yelled, pacing around the small apartment. 10 years on this job, and he tells me how to carry boxes. Ernest, please calm down. Dana tried to calm him down. Talk to him calmly tomorrow. Don't tell me what to do. Ernest turned sharply toward her. Things aren't going well as it is, and now you. He didn't finish, but Dana saw something in his eyes that made her take a step back. Ernest had never raised a hand to her, but lately, his anger had become more unpredictable. Over the weekend, Dana decided to take a risk. She wrote to Javier on the Uber Eats app, saying she wanted to order food while Ernest was at work. On Monday, when her husband left for the warehouse, she placed the order. Javier arrived in half an hour, and this time their conversation lasted almost 15 minutes. They talked about work, the city, and plans for the future. For the first time in a long time, Dana felt like an interesting conversation partner, not just a wife who had to cook dinner and not cause any trouble. Can I leave you my number? Javier asked before leaving. In case you want to chat, just talk. Dana hesitated for a second. Sure. Over the next week, they texted each other almost every day. Short messages about work, the weather, and the small events of the day. Nothing scandalous, but Dana realized that these exchanges had become a bright spot in her gray everyday life. Meanwhile, Ernest was becoming increasingly irritable at home. Another conflict at work, a pay cut, constant tension. All of this spilled over into evening monologues about the unfairness of life, punctuated by sharp remarks directed at Dana. Have you gone completely stupid? He exploded on Wednesday evening when Dana accidentally spilled some salt. You can't even do something as simple as this properly. I'm sorry, it was an accident. Dana began to pick up the grains from the floor. An accident. Everything you do is an accident. The apartment is always dirty, and you're a terrible cook. Dana silently cleaned up the salt and finished making dinner, but inside, she was boiling. 6 months ago, Ernest would never have allowed himself to speak to her like that. Now, any little thing could provoke an explosion. On Friday evening, Javier suggested meeting at a cafe near her house. Just to have a coffee and talk, he wrote. Dana thought about it for a long time, realizing that she was crossing an invisible line. But her desire to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home was stronger than her common sense. She told Ernest that she was going to see a friend from the supermarket and met Javier at a small roadside cafe. They talked for almost 2 hours. Javier talked about his plans, about his family who had come from Mexico when he was 10, about how difficult it was to combine work and study. Dana shared her dreams of a teaching career, of how she wanted to work with children. Why don't you go back to school? Javier asked. It's never too late to start. Money, Time my husband wouldn't understand. Dana shrugged. And who needs a 22-year-old teacher with no experience? You need it. It's your dream. Simple words, but they resonated in Dana's soul with both pain and hope. When was the last time Ernest had asked about her dreams? That evening at home, Ernest asked how her meeting with her friend had gone. Dana lied, saying they had talked about work and complained about their bosses. Ernest nodded, not really listening. His attention was fixed on the TV. A week later, they met again. This time in the park near the college where Javier studied. They walked along the paths, talking about the books they read at school, movies, and plans for the future. Dana felt young and alive, as if she had awakened from a long sleep. When they stopped by the pond, Javier took her hand. Dana, I know you're married, but I can't stop thinking about you. Dana's heart began to beat faster. Javier, Just say you feel the same way. He turned to face her. I can see how you look at me. Dana wanted to say that it was wrong, that she had a husband, that they shouldn't. But instead, she nodded. Yes, I do. Their first kiss was tender and cautious. Dana hadn't felt this way in a long time, a mixture of excitement, fear, and incredible happiness. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Dana met with Javier 3 times a week, each time coming up with new excuses for Ernest. Shopping, meeting a colleague, visiting the doctor, the lies came more and more easily. Their relationship quickly became more intimate. They spent their first night together in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. Dana felt guilty, but at the same time, alive and desired, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Things at home with Ernest were getting worse. Last week, he was finally laid off from his job. Now he sat at home all day, drinking beer and angry at the world. They were running out of money, and finding a new job was practically impossible. Why are you always out? Ernest asked on Thursday evening when Dana returned from another meeting with Javier. You used to come home after work and sit here. I'm meeting up with the girls from work, Dana replied, avoiding his gaze. I need to distract myself from my problems somehow. Ernest looked at her intently, but said nothing. Dana went into the bathroom, feeling her cheeks burn. She knew she was playing with fire, but she couldn't stop. The first symptoms appeared a month after she started her affair with Javier. Dana woke up in the morning feeling exhausted, and this feeling lasted for several days in a row. At first, she blamed it on stress and lack of sleep. Working at the cash register, constant arguments with Ernest, and secret meetings with Javier were exhausting her emotionally and physically. But when the fatigue was compounded by swollen lymph nodes in her neck and a low-grade fever that had lasted for a week, Dana began to worry. The pain in her throat intensified, swallowing became difficult, and strange rashes appeared on her body. Maybe it's just the flu, she said to herself, standing in front of the bathroom mirror and examining the reddish spots on her skin. But her inner voice told her that it was more serious than a common cold. Ernest had hardly paid any attention to her lately. After being fired, he had fallen into a depression, which he drowned in alcohol. He spent his days lying on the couch, watching TV and drinking beer, occasionally interrupting himself with angry rants about the injustice of the world. Dana was even glad that he didn't notice her poor health. She didn't need another reason for a fight. 2 weeks later, when her symptoms not only persisted but worsened, Dana decided to see a doctor. There was always a line at the free clinic on Main Street, but for the poor residents of Youngstown, it was the only affordable option for medical care. Dr. James Cole, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, had been seeing patients for 20 years. He examined Dana, felt her lymph nodes, took her temperature, and asked a few questions about her symptoms. How long have you been feeling this way? He asked, writing something down in her chart. About 2 weeks. At first, I thought I was just tired. Have you had any unprotected sex recently? Dana felt the color drain from her face. I'm married. That doesn't answer my question. Dr. Cole looked at her intently, but without judgment. I need to know about all possible risk factors. After a long pause, Dana nodded. Yes, I have. Okay, I'll send you for tests. You'll have your blood drawn today, and the results will be ready in 3 days. The 3 days of waiting seemed to drag on forever. Dana tried to work as usual, but her thoughts kept returning to the doctor's visit. She knew the doctor suspected something serious, otherwise he wouldn't have ordered tests. Her meetings with Javier became less frequent. Dana cited poor health, but didn't mention her visit to the doctor. Something inside her told her it was better to wait for the test results before sharing her concerns. On Friday morning, the clinic called and asked her to come in for the results. Dana took a day off work, citing family circumstances, and went to see Dr. Cole. "Have a seat, Dana," the doctor said when she entered the office. His expression was serious. "I need to tell you the test results." Dana's heart began to race. She sat down in the chair across from the doctor's desk, clenching her fists. "The HIV test came back positive," Dr. Cole said quietly. "I understand this is a shock." The rest of the doctor's words were lost in the ringing in her ears. HIV. Positive. Dana felt the world around her begin to spin. She heard the doctor say something about modern treatments, about how this wasn't a death sentence, about how she could live a full life, but the words didn't register. How is that possible?" she finally managed to say. "HIV is transmitted sexually, through blood, from mother to child," Dr. Cole explained. "Given your symptoms and when they appeared, the infection occurred recently, possibly a month or 2 ago." Dana quickly calculated in her mind. A month or 2 ago, that was when her affair with Javier began. But how could he have HIV? He was a young, healthy guy. "You need to inform all of your sexual partners of the diagnosis," the doctor continued. "They need to be tested." "My husband too?" "Absolutely, and the sooner, the better." Dana left the clinic in a state of shock. The world around her seemed unreal, as if she were watching a movie about someone else's life. HIV positive. The words didn't fit in her head. At home, Ernest was lying on the couch as usual. Empty beer cans were on the floor, and some daytime show was playing on TV. Dana sat down next to him, not knowing how to start the conversation. "Ernest, we need to talk." "About what?" He didn't take his eyes off the screen. "I went to the doctor. I had some tests done." Dana took a deep breath. "I have HIV." Ernest slowly turned his head toward her. He was silent for a few seconds, digesting what he had heard. "What did you say?" "HIV infection. The doctor said it happened recently." Ernest sat down on the sofa, his attention completely focused on his wife. "Where? How?" "I don't know," Dana lied, but her voice trembled. "What do you mean, I don't know?" Ernest jumped up from the sofa. "HIV doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Are you shooting up drugs? Or—" He paused, and Dana saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "You need to get tested too," she said quickly, trying to change the subject. "The doctor said that all sexual partners should be tested." Ernest stared at her silently for several long seconds. Then he grabbed his car keys and left the apartment, slamming the door behind him. He returned late in the evening, drunk and gloomy. Dana didn't ask where he had been. The smell of alcohol made it clear that he had been at a bar. Ernest went to bed without saying a word. In the morning, he announced that he was going to get tested. He returned 2 hours later, locked himself in the bathroom, and didn't come out for a long time. When he finally appeared, his face was pale. "Well?" Dana asked, although she already knew the answer from his expression. "Positive," Ernest said hoarsely. "Positive too." They sat across from each other in the kitchen, unable to believe what was happening. Both were sick, both infected with a deadly disease. But Ernest was thinking about more than that. "Dana," he said slowly, "the last time it was 3 months ago, maybe longer." Dana felt a chill spread through her body. "Ernest, And the doctor said the infection was recent, a month or two ago. Ernest got up from the table. So you picked up this shit somewhere and passed it on to me? Not necessarily. It is, Ernest barked. Do you think I'm an idiot? A month ago you started going out a lot, meeting friends, shopping. It was all a lie. Dana was silent, realizing that denial was useless. Who is he? Ernest asked quietly, and the silence made Dana even more afraid than the shouting had. Who is this bastard who killed us both? Ernest, Who? He yelled, slamming his fist on the table. Dana flinched. Javier, the delivery guy, the one who brought the food. Ernest froze. He processed the information for a few seconds, then laughed. A terrible, unnatural laugh. The delivery guy, the delivery boy. He shook his head. How old is he? 20? And this puppy infected us with HIV. Maybe he doesn't even know. I don't care if he knows or not. Ernest threw an empty beer can at the wall. Because of you and that idiot, we're both dead now. Dana tried to approach him, but Ernest pushed her away. Don't you dare touch me. Don't you ever dare again. The next few days passed in a heavy atmosphere. Ernest didn't talk to Dana, only glared at her and drank even more than usual. Dana tried to contact Javier, but didn't know how to tell him about the diagnosis. Finally, she wrote him a message asking to meet. They met at the same cafe where it all began, but now the atmosphere was completely different. Javier, I need to tell you something, Dana began. I got tested, I have HIV. Javier's face turned pale. What? How? You need to get tested too, right away. But I haven't been with anyone but you for 6 months. Javier looked at her in confusion. Where did you get it? I don't know, but we both need treatment. Javier got tested the next day. The result was negative. When Dana told Ernest at home, he finally exploded. So it's not from him, he said slowly. So I infected you. But how did I get it? He stopped, remembering something. Dana saw how his face changed. Damn, Ernest whispered. Damn it. What? Remember 4 months ago when I cut myself badly at the warehouse? My hand was bleeding, and the whole team bandaged it up. Ernest ran his hand over his face. And then Johnson was diagnosed with HIV, a month after that incident. The picture became clear. Ernest had been infected at work, passed it on to Dana, and she thought she had caught it from Javier. But this discovery did not make the situation any easier. If anything, it made it worse. So I cheated on you for no reason, Dana said quietly. Because of a stupid affair. Ernest looked at her with hatred. Yes, just like that. And because of your betrayal, we almost accused an innocent guy. Ernest, I didn't know. Shut up, he cut her off. Just shut up. Ernest didn't say anything for several days, but Dana could feel the rage building up inside him. He drank more than usual, looked at her with open hatred, and sometimes she noticed him muttering something under his breath. On Thursday evening, he suddenly spoke. You know what kills me the most? Dana looked up from the book she was trying to read. We're both going to die from this disease, slowly, painfully, and that Javier will go on living without even knowing that he destroyed our family. Ernest, it's not his fault. He fucked someone else's wife. Ernest exploded. He knew you were married, but that didn't stop him. I'm to blame too. You're the most to blame. Ernest stood up and walked over to the window. But he'll get what he deserves too. Something in his tone made Dana wary. What do you mean? Ernest turned to her and smiled. A cold, frightening smile. Justice, Dana. Just justice. On the morning of November 15th, Mrs. Consuelo Garcia was climbing the stairs of her 2-story house on Maple Street in Youngstown with a basket of laundry. The 70-year-old woman had been renting apartments for 20 years and knew all her tenants by name and habit. Dana Jenkins from apartment 4B always left for work at exactly 8:30, but today it was already 9:30 and her car was not in the parking lot. Mrs. Garcia knocked on the apartment door. Silence. She knocked louder. Again, silence. But this time she thought she heard music playing inside. Strange. Dana never played music so loud in the morning. Returning to her apartment, the elderly woman called the Food Max supermarket where Dana worked. The manager confirmed that Jenkins had not shown up for work and had not notified anyone of her absence. Mrs. Garcia waited until noon. Then, remembering the recent strange noises and screams from apartment 4B, decided to call the police. Officers Mike Robertson and Jessica Chang arrived at the Maple Street home at 12:47 p.m. Mrs. Garcia met them at the entrance, nervously fiddling with her apartment keys. "She never misses work without warning," the elderly woman explained to the police. "And last night I heard shouting. I thought she was arguing with her husband again. But today it's so quiet." The officers went up to the second floor. Robertson knocked on the door of apartment 4B and introduced himself. There was no answer. Muffled sounds of a television or radio could be heard through the door. After several attempts to reach the residence, the police asked Mrs. Garcia to open the door with her key. The smell hit their noses as soon as the door opened. It was a metallic, sweetish smell that experienced police officers recognize immediately. Robertson stopped Mrs. Garcia with a wave of his hand and did not let her go inside. The apartment was small, an entryway, a combined living room and kitchen, and a bathroom. Dana Jenkins' body was lying on the floor between the sofa and the television. The 22-year-old woman was dressed in casual clothes, old jeans and a t-shirt. There were multiple stab wounds on her chest and stomach, and a pool of blood under her body. The TV was on, showing the afternoon news, and the sound made the scene even more surreal. Officer Chang immediately called an ambulance and the homicide department, although it was obvious that help was no longer needed. Robertson began examining the scene, avoiding the center of the room so as not to disturb any evidence. A bloody knife lay on the kitchen table, an ordinary kitchen knife with a wooden handle. There were few signs of a struggle, a glass that had fallen from the table, scattered magazines. Dana's purse was on the sofa, her wallet was intact, and her money and credit cards were untouched. Robbery was ruled out. Detective Sarah Chen arrived at the scene at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The 35-year-old Asian woman of Korean descent had been working in the homicide department for 10 years and had seen a lot, but domestic murders always got on her nerves especially badly. The examination showed that the murder had taken place in the evening or at night, as evidenced by the degree of rigor mortis and the temperature. Preliminary estimates put the time between 8 p.m. yesterday and 2 a.m. The cause of death was multiple stab wounds inflicted with a kitchen knife. The victim suffered 7 wounds, 3 of which were fatal. "Where's the husband?" Detective Chen asked Officer Robertson. "We don't know yet. Neighbors say the couple often argued. Mrs. Garcia claims she heard screams coming from the apartment yesterday." The detective began questioning the neighbors. Mrs. Garcia said that Ernest Jenkins had recently lost his job and started drinking heavily. The arguments between the couple became frequent and loud. Yesterday, around 9 in the evening, she heard shouting and the sound of breaking dishes. "I wanted to call the police," the elderly woman admitted, "but they had argued before. I thought it would pass, as always." Jeff Collins, who lived in the apartment across the hall, confirmed the information about the arguments. "This guy, Ernest, has been acting strange lately. He used to just drink and watch TV, but recently he started muttering something under his breath when he met me in the hallway." Information from Mrs. Jenkins from the neighboring house proved to be important. The elderly woman was walking her dog late at night and saw a familiar car driving away from the house on Maple Street. A red Honda Civic, an old model. "I saw it many times when Dana's husband was still working." It was Ernest's car, but the witness couldn't say exactly when it left, somewhere between 9:30 and 11 in the evening. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Detective Chen had received the first results from the forensic team. The fingerprints on the knife belonged to the victim. Dana had been cooking in the kitchen. But there were other fingerprints, smudged and partially wiped away by blood. The examination would take time. The search for Ernest was not long. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he was found at the Lucky Strike bar on Oak Street, 3 miles from the scene of the murder. The 23-year-old man was sitting in the corner of the room, methodically drinking whiskey. The bartender said Ernest had arrived around midnight and had hardly left his seat. The arrest went smoothly. Ernest seemed drunk, but not so much that he couldn't understand what was going on. When asked where he had been the previous evening, he replied with a single word: "Here." Ernest's clothes were clean, with no traces of blood. But Detective Chen knew that the killer had had enough time to change clothes and get rid of the evidence. During the preliminary interrogation, Ernest remained strangely calm. He answered questions about his wife's death briefly and without emotion. "I knew it would happen." What exactly would happen? What had to happen? The detective tried to find out details about their family life, but Ernest was evasive. Only when the conversation turned to recent problems did he become more talkative. "We're both sick," he said. "HIV. Dana was cheating on me." This was important information. Infidelity as a motive for murder was a classic case in Detective Chen's practice. But when she asked for the name of the lover, Ernest suddenly fell silent. "I want to talk to a lawyer." In parallel with the interrogation of Ernest, the detective sought information about Dana's personal life. Her co-workers at the supermarket said that in recent months, she had seemed more lively, often smiling for no reason. The manager recalled that Dana had begun asking for time off more often, citing family matters. Important information was provided by cashier Linda Martinez, who worked the same shift as Dana. She started ordering food delivery to her home almost every day. She never did that before, saying it was too expensive. Detective Chen requested data from food delivery apps. Dana Jenkins' order history showed a sharp increase in orders since August. Most of the deliveries were made by one courier, Javier Morales. By the evening of the same day, the police had found Javier. The 21-year-old Uber Eats delivery driver lived in a rented room in a house on Cherry Street, worked, and studied at a local college. When the detectives showed up at his door, the young man looked confused and frightened. "Dana is dead?" he asked when he heard the news. "How? What happened?" Javier willingly agreed to come to the police station to give a statement. He told them how he met Dana while delivering food and how they started a relationship. He did not hide the fact that he knew she was married, but claimed that their romance was based on mutual feelings. "I didn't force her," Javier repeated. "She wanted to see me." When asked when he last saw Dana, he replied that it was 3 days ago at a cafe on Main Street. That's when she told him about her HIV diagnosis and insisted that he get tested. "I had my blood tested the next day. The result was negative." Javier showed her a certificate from the clinic. Detective Chen noted that the young man seemed genuinely shocked by Dana's death, but experience told her that murderers can be good actors. Javier's alibi needed to be checked. He claimed that he had been working last night, delivering orders until 9:30, and then went home to prepare for a college exam. Detectives requested GPS data from his phone and the Uber app. By the end of the day, investigators had 2 suspects with different motives. Ernest was a betrayed husband who had learned of his wife's infidelity and terminal illness. Javier was a lover who may have feared the consequences of his relationship with a married woman and his HIV diagnosis. Both had access to the victim, both knew about her family problems, and both could have been in the apartment last night. The question was, which of them had held the kitchen knife when Dana Jenkins' life was cut short? The next day, Detective Chen received the first results of the technical examination. GPS data from Javier Morales' phone showed his routes on the day of the murder. He delivered his last order at 9:34 p.m. to the downtown area. Then the GPS recorded his movement straight home. At 10:15 p.m., the phone was at his address on Cherry Street and did not leave that location until morning. The Uber app confirmed this data. At 9:45 p.m., Javier ended his workday through the app. The system recorded his status as offline until the next morning. With Ernest, the situation was more complicated. His phone was turned off from 8:30 p.m. to 11:45 p.m. on the day of the murder. This could mean a variety of things, from a desire to avoid being tracked to simply running out of battery. The bartender at Lucky Strike confirmed that Ernest had arrived at the bar around midnight, but couldn't say for sure whether he looked like he had just arrived from far away or was somewhere nearby. The second day of the investigation began with another interrogation of Ernest. This time, Detective Chen chose a more direct approach. "Ernest, we know that your phone was turned off for 3 hours on the evening of the murder. Explain why." "The battery died," he replied monotonously. "You showed up at the bar at midnight. Where were you before that?" "Driving around town. I was thinking." "What were you thinking about?" Ernest was silent for a long time, staring at the table. Then he looked up at the detective. "That justice must prevail." Detective Chen felt she had an important lead. "What do you mean by justice?" "When a person gets what they deserve for their actions." At the same time, forensic experts analyzed the physical evidence. 2 sets of fingerprints were found on the kitchen knife, Dana's and another person's. The partially blood-stained prints belonged to Ernest Jenkins. It was a breakthrough in the case. Ernest's lawyer tried to explain the presence of the fingerprints by saying that his client lived in the apartment and could have touched the kitchen utensils at any time. But the forensic expert explained an important detail. The fingerprints were on top of the victim's bloodstains. This means that the person touched the knife after Dana Jenkins' blood appeared on it. On the 3rd day of the investigation, Detective Chen decided to go all in. She arranged a confrontation between Ernest and Javier. The young men met in the interrogation room for the first time since the murder. Javier looked at Ernest with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Ernest studied his wife's lover with a cold, appraising gaze. "Javier, tell Ernest about your relationship with Dana," suggested the detective. We loved each other," said Javier, looking at the floor. "I knew she was married, but you decided to destroy someone else's family," Ernest interrupted. For the first time in days of questioning, there was emotion in his voice. "I didn't destroy it. Dana herself said you had problems. We had problems, but we could have solved them, until you came along." Detective Chen watched the reactions of both men closely. Javier looked guilty, but not malicious. Ernest, on the other hand, showed cold hatred. "Ernest, do you blame Javier for Dana's death?" she asked. "He didn't kill her with a knife, but he killed her," Ernest replied. "He made her betray our marriage. He made her think she was infected by him." "But you infected your wife with HIV yourself. By accident, out of stupidity. But he deliberately destroyed our life." The tension in the room reached its peak. Javier tried to say something, but Ernest continued. "Do you know what she said to me on her last day? That she was ashamed. That she understood she had ruined everything because of a stupid affair with a boy." "Ernest," Detective Chen leaned forward, "tell us what happened in the apartment on the evening of November 15th. The man was silent for a long time. Then he sighed and began to speak. "I came home around 8. Dana was cooking dinner as usual. We ate, barely speaking. Then she said she wanted to talk to me." Ernest paused, gathering his thoughts. "She said she couldn't live like this anymore. That she wanted to leave me, to go to him." He nodded toward Javier. "She said they were planning to start a new life." Javier raised his head sharply. "That's not true. We never planned." "Shut up," Ernest snapped. "Dana said you offered to live with her, that you were willing to pay for her treatment." Detective Chen asked Javier not to comment and to let Ernest finish his story. "I told her she couldn't leave, that we were both sick and needed to support each other. But she replied..." Ernest clenched his fists. "She replied that she didn't want to die next to a man she no longer loved." Silence fell over the office. Ernest continued in a quieter voice. "We started arguing. We were yelling at each other. Dana said she never really loved me, that she only married me because she was afraid of being alone. And then you took the knife? Not right away. First, I went out onto the balcony to smoke and calm down. I stood there for about 20 minutes thinking. Then I went back into the apartment. Ernest fell silent for a long time. And what happened next? The detective asked gently. Dana was packing her things. She was putting her clothes in a bag. She saw me and said, "I'm leaving today. Don't try to stop me." And then she added, Ernest shook his head. She added that she was glad she had Javier, that for the first time in years, she felt alive. Was it her words that made you angry? Her words killed me, Ernest replied. I realized I had lost my wife long before I found out about the affair, and that she would never come back. Detective Chen waited for him to continue. I went to the kitchen and got a knife. I went back to the room. Dana didn't even turn around when I approached her. She kept packing her things and talking about how she was going to start a new life. Ernest fell silent. You stabbed her, Detective Chen stated. 7 times, Ernest replied monotonously. She didn't even scream. She just looked at me in surprise when she realized what was happening. Javier covered his face with his hands. A wave of heavy silence swept through the room. After that, you changed your clothes and went to a bar? Detective Chen continued. Yes, I burned my clothes in a dumpster behind the house. I changed into clean clothes. I got in the car and went to drink. Why didn't you try to hide the crime? Ernest looked at the detective in surprise. Why should I? I killed my wife. Sooner or later it would come out. Does it matter if it's today or a week from now? His confession was complete and detailed. Ernest described every moment of the crime without attempting to justify himself or shift the blame. He accepted responsibility for his actions with frightening calm. 2 weeks later, the case went to trial. Ernest Jenkins was charged with first-degree murder. The defense tried to get the crime recognized as having been committed in the heat of passion, but the irrefutable evidence and detailed planning of his actions after the murder spoke against this version. The trial lasted a month. Ernest maintained the same cold composure he had shown during the investigation. He showed no remorse and did not ask for forgiveness from the victims' relatives. Javier Morales testified as a witness. The young man looked broken by guilt, even though he was not legally responsible for the tragedy. The jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge sentenced Ernest to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. 6 months later, Detective Chen received a letter from Javier Morales. The young man had quit his job as a delivery man and was focusing on his college studies. He wrote that he thought about Dana constantly and how their romance had led to tragedy. I know I didn't kill her, Javier wrote, but I feel guilty for her death. If we hadn't met, maybe she and Ernest could have worked out their problems. Ernest was serving his sentence in a maximum security prison in Ohio. According to prison officials, he did not cause any problems, did not interact with other inmates, and read a lot. He was receiving HIV treatment at the state's expense. The apartment on Maple Street stood empty for 3 months until Mrs. Garcia found new tenants. The elderly woman told her neighbors that she sometimes heard strange noises coming from the Jenkins' former apartment, but doctors attributed this to post-traumatic stress. Dana's parents, who lived in a neighboring state, took her personal belongings and photographs. The funeral was held in a small family circle. Ernest's parents did not attend their daughter-in-law's funeral and did not visit their son in prison. A year after the tragedy, Detective Chen reflected on the Jenkins case as a classic example of how economic hardship, illness, and family problems can lead to irreparable disaster. 3 young people, each seeking happiness and understanding, were drawn into a tragedy that changed or destroyed their lives. Dana Jenkins' story became one of 78 murders committed in Youngstown that year. Statistics that hide behind the numbers are ruined lives and unfulfilled dreams in a city where hope for a better future often proves stronger than common sense.